On today's Locked On Thunder podcast, who in the Western Conference gets better as the dust settles from the trade deadline? Who are threats to the Thunder? And what questions do we still have about Oklahoma City moving forward?
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, media member, and beat writer for Thunder on SI, Rylan Stiles. Follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LO ThunderPod. On today's show, we are joined by Nick Crain at Crain NBA, Forbes.com media luminary Nick Crain, to discuss the Oklahoma City Thunder and the trade deadline, the fallout from it, who contends with the Thunder, and what questions we still have for Oklahoma City despite this historic start. Nick, how you doing today?
I'm great. It's the best time of the year. We just had the trade deadline, got the All-Star break coming up. You and I will get to record some fun stuff over the next week and a half. So good things to come, man.
Really good things to come. It'll be a lot of fun to see how the All-Star break goes. I'm heading into the All-Star weekend with an open mind, Nick. I know that the All-Star game has been under fire for many people for the past few games, but now they have a new format, this tournament, where it'll be J-Dub and Shea in the first semifinal. It'll be the OGs against the Rising Stars winner. I think that this could be the right mix of competitiveness and fun that the All-Star game is trying to get. We'll see if they can actually thread that needle. But before they go to San Francisco, there is this element of the trade deadline, a lot of moving parts. We've seen the debuts now. We've seen some fallout from the trade deadline. The biggest trade, of course, that happened was Luka Doncic is now a member of the Los Angeles Lakers. What was your reaction to that? Obviously shock, but when you look at this Lakers team now and the Mark Williams trade falling through, how do you view LA when it comes to contention status?
Yeah, it's an incomplete roster. That's no question here. Like even the Mark Williams trade, there was the risk of injury, and that's the reason it fell through. I think this is a polarizing topic. I think depending on who you ask, they may say it's great, the storyline, LeBron, Luka, but they're not a threat to a complete team like the Thunder. I would agree in some respects. My pushback would be the playoff performances and the playoff history. You know better than anybody. Luka statistically in the playoffs, unbelievable.
Yeah.
Like he puts up the numbers, he wins the games, he's done it from a very young age. He's carried multiple teams, most recently on one leg, to the deep rounds of the playoffs. LeBron, obviously later in his career, but he's still LeBron James, still doing incredible things at 40. Anytime you put two premier playoff performers together on the same team, I don't care that much about the incomplete roster. That's a real concern for somebody. The Thunder may never cross them in the playoffs, but for somebody that will be a problem, whether they beat them in whatever round that is or lose to them. I just don't see that. That's not a team that's going to get swept by anybody.
Yeah, they're not going to get swept. They're not the pushover that some want them to be. They're also not the juggernaut that others want them to be. The truth is kind of in the middle here. And as far as a potential Thunder matchup goes, the Thunder have better options than anyone in terms of defenders to slow down the Luka and LeBron offense as much as possible. And their defense against Dallas was a reason why that series was so close. And it was a 6-game series with a 0-point differential. They kept games close. They just lost the game in the sense of they didn't have guys who can hit shots. They didn't have a backup center. They did not have a solution to the Josh Giddey problem. All those things are different now. And on the flip side, while the Lakers did give Shea trouble last year, and the Lakers last year would have been a very tough matchup for the Thunder in the playoffs, they're kind of basing that on last year's resume, though, in the sense of Vanderbilt and Dorian Finney-Smith, and these guys are good defenders, on the perimeter. That they can trip up Shea a little bit, but you no longer get to funnel Shea into Anthony Davis now. And so that really neuters some of what LA had success with in slowing down Shea. And if the Thunder can slow down their offense, I'd still, of course, lean Oklahoma City in a potential Laker matchup, even though LA has the star power and historically stars can carry you in the playoffs.
Yeah, they're the definition of a team that any spectrum of outcomes would not surprise me. They could get swept in the first round. Maybe I still think, like I said, it's unlikely they get swept. They have enough talent to win a game. But if they lost a series in 5, I would not be shocked. If they won a series against anybody, I would also not be shocked. Like, should they beat the Thunder? No. But if they were to beat the Thunder in the playoffs, and I don't think they would, I completely agree with you. The Thunder have every reason to beat the Lakers and are a better team than the Lakers. But if the Lakers were to beat the Thunder in the playoffs, I wouldn't be able to sit here and say, oh my gosh, I'm shocked. Because if that happens, it's because LeBron and Luka go nuclear, and that is certainly on the table.
Yeah, and then on the flip side of that coin, the Mavericks have fallen into disarray. I mean, it's one of the only trades I can remember where weeks later, days and days and days later, I think we're up to like 10 days past the trade, where it just keeps getting worse. I mean, the AD injury, the kicking fans out, every time that Nico Harrison opens his mouth, it gets worse from a Maverick standpoint. Let's operate with the best case scenario for Dallas, and that is that AD is back in a month, and that Lively is ready for the playoffs. They still are a threat to the Thunder, I think, not a threat so much that the Thunder would lose the series, but they're a unique matchup for Oklahoma City. I do think that it would be interesting to see it happen because, yes, PJ presents a size issue for OKC. However, as we've seen with Hartenstein and Holmgren in the starting lineup, sliding J-Dub to the 3 and having J-Dub on PJ Washington is a lot different than the smaller perimeter defenders that PJ was used to seeing against Oklahoma City. So I think that the whole complexity of that matchup changes. I think that Kyrie's not as talented as a passer as Luka to where he can't find those open guys and make these magical skip passes out of a blitz and out of a double team the way that Luka was able to in the last postseason matchup. And that's going to hurt them a bit. I still think that Dallas would give them a series of fully healthy. That's a massive if they're fully healthy. But I think that the turn table does turn in favor of Oklahoma City after this trade.
Yeah, I think very well said. The only thing I would add, this is not to discount the level of talent on the Mavericks. Like, having 2 players the caliber of AD and Kyrie is significant in a playoff series. That said, if you think about when Anthony Davis has A, won championships, and B, had the most success, it's as a number 2. Same with Kyrie when he's won championships and when he's been at his best, it's been as a number 2. I think the Mavericks have 2 elite number 2s on the team. They lack the number 1. One of those guys will have to step up and be a number 1. And to date, whether it be Kyrie at his various stops or AD in New Orleans, it just is not enough when you're playing against a guy like Shea, who is a premier number 1. I just think in the playoffs, stars shine, and the Mavericks have 2 number 2s, which can work. But against a real number 1 and MVP caliber player like a Shea, like a Jokic, it's going to be tough.
It will be very tough. That's not the only changes, though, made across the Western Conference. Where does it land now? Who are the biggest threats? Who have completely taken themselves out of the running when it comes to trying to dethrone Oklahoma City at the top of the Western Conference? We'll talk about that coming up. But first, I want to say right now about our good friends over at WayFair. Give your home a refresh that it needs at wayfair.com. Whether it's the holiday hustle and bustle and nothing is giving your home the same TLC as it was whenever it was all decorated in that holiday jingle and joy. It's always nice to declutter and refresh your space to get back into a routine after you tidy up and start clearing out that holiday decor. So give your space a new look and start the year right with WayFair, as everything that you need is there within your budget at WayFair. You could currently be looking for a new TV stand, just like I am, or be looking for a nice office desk space for yourself, the way that Nick Crain is, it's great to find those things at WayFair because it's free and hassle-free delivery, even for larger items. With WayFair site is so easy to navigate. I find everything I need in time, in really just a great sequence from WayFair in terms of finding stuff from the website and getting it to your door. It's great stuff over there at WayFair. There's something for every style and every home, no matter your space or your budget. So WayFair makes it easy to tackle your New Year's home goals of what you want to add to your space and what you want to add to your decor or style. They have it all for you to give your home a refresh that it needs at WayFair. Head to wayfair.com right now. That's WAYFAIR.com. WayFair, every style, every home, wayfair.com. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Nick, obviously Shannon Sharp made the rounds today, picking the Lakers to just curb stomp the Thunder. We've addressed the Lakers part of this. I would really hesitate to see how they're going to match up with Oklahoma City in the sense of winning a series. I think that they can for sure win you a couple of games, and even maybe 3, and push it to the limit. But I think the Thunder would come out on top in that series. We've talked Dallas. Denver did not make a trade deadline move, much like the Thunder. Each team just riding with the group that they have. Each team going to have the time to build extreme continuity together, unlike these other teams retooling and reshaping on the fly. Is Denver the biggest threat to Oklahoma City out west?
Given my counter argument for the Mavericks, I think I have to say yes. Jokic has done it as the 1A premier alpha player. He had help. Like, it wasn't a one-man show. Like Jamal Murray, as much slack as he gets for FIBA and Olympic play and some of his recent NBA play and the injuries, like, that's also a guy that can give you 50 in a game and make things interesting. I think I would say yes. The Nuggets would pose the biggest threat. That said, you bring up a good point. The Nuggets didn't make a move. The Rockets didn't make a significant move. The Grizzlies made moves, but I don't think it was like needle moving stuff, more just like kind of end of bench personnel stuff. That's the interesting part of this deadline was Oklahoma City didn't make a splash besides getting Chet back, which wasn't a trade, but nor did the teams below them in the standings immediately. So yes, I would agree with you on Denver being the biggest threat post the deadline. I don't know if you have thoughts on, like, behind Denver, like who is the next? That's the more interesting question to me.
Yeah, because with Denver, you can easily see these two teams just duking it out in the Western Conference Finals, as Denver has the best player in the world, and historically in the NBA, the best player in the world has been able to bring their team to the NBA Finals. He's done it. He's won the championship. And to your point, I mean, Michael Porter Jr. could easily go off in 2 of the 3 games, and then in the other games needed to win a series, you could see a huge Christian game. You could see a huge game from Aaron Gordon working behind Jokic in the high post, and Gordon cutting back door in the dunker spot, and being able to exploit some things against the Thunder. Ultimately, the Thunder are still bared out to be the better team against Denver, but it's not going to be a cakewalk. It would be the most grueling series. It would be the series that I think you easily see going 7. The rest of the competition out west, you really have to squint your eyes and like paint a really dramatic picture in both directions, dramatically positive for the other team, dramatically negative for the Thunder, to see them going the distance in a series against one another. But with Denver, these two teams can just play straight up, and like each team has a normal series, and this still goes 7 games, and it's still sort of a coin flip of who wins. I would lean Thunder. I wouldn't begrudge anyone who would lean a different direction. But past Denver, you're right. It's the more interesting question at number 3, because they didn't go make moves. Like Houston didn't go get a go-to score. So to me, Houston can make it a interesting series because their defense is such that they can get it into the mud. They can make it a rock fight. They can make it a slog fest series. But what happens in those games? You need someone to bring you out of the mud in the last 5 minutes, and only Oklahoma City has that guy between those two teams. Sure, I don't think that they'd sweep Houston. They could get another Fred VanVleet 38-point night, but they can't get 4 of those against Oklahoma City. So to me, that moves them down the ladder. And then Memphis, I was really looking forward to Saturday's matchup against Memphis, a fully healthy Memphis team against a Thunder shorthanded team where the Thunder still came out on top. That was their most impressive win of the year to me in Oklahoma City. Whenever they beat Memphis in Memphis on Saturday. And that's what kind of neutered some of my excitement for a potential playoff matchup, is because you played a fully healthy Memphis team and Zach Edey was played off the floor and Jalen Wells was picked on. And eventually you're going to have to play him off the floor in the postseason. And now you take those two away, and that dramatically changes Memphis's rotation. John Morant is not having the season you would expect John Morant to have. Perhaps he can turn it on in the playoffs, but even so, he's not going to get to Shea levels.
No.
And then Jaren Jackson Jr., who's an excellent player. You have Chet Holmgren and you have, Isaiah Hartenstein to handle that matchup. So if I had to pick a team right now to be the number 2 threat, I'd pick a fully healthy Dallas team, but I don't trust that they're going to be fully healthy. So I would pick not Dallas in that case. I'd pick Memphis.
Okay. Yeah, I think what's interesting too, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts. The teams just below Oklahoma City did not make significant moves, but the teams that did were the teams that probably could be the first round matchup for Oklahoma City. Let's assume they're on the 1 seed. I think they're, as we're recording this, 7.5, 8 games.
They're 8 games
the
up
result.
as we're recording this.
Yeah. In all likelihood, they will be the 1 seed, even if they have unfavorable injury luck down the stretch. It's a pretty good cushion at this point in the season. They'll be playing the 8 seed in all likelihood, and the teams that could be the 8 seed based on the play-in, not that these teams are like a huge risk, but the teams in that range are the ones that improved. You have San Antonio, who added De'Aaron Fox. You have Golden State, who added Jimmy Butler. You have the Sacramento Kings that I think took a step back, but at least the personnel's different now. These teams in that range are still not scary, but they're different and interesting and more star power and playoff power in some cases. Whether that means it's a 5-game series instead of 4 is probably what we're discussing there. But even then, the extra game is another game where someone could get injured or tweak an ankle that makes them, a little hobbly going into the next series. So that is a factor in my mind in some capacity, that even if the Suns keep falling, do you want them in the first round? I think the Thunder still handle them very easily, but that's a series that you could very easily see KD and Book going off for a game, making it 5. The first round is what got more interesting to me at the deadline.
Yeah, I mean, it for sure did. I think that when you're ranking threats of who could beat the Thunder in a series, it's Denver, a gap, and then Dallas, LA, Memphis, and then a gap, and then the rest of the West. As far as realistically who could fall to 8 and you would want to avoid, the teams I could see in the 8 spot would be the Clippers, because they're tied in the standings of games back with the 7, as they're the 6 right now. They could be in the play-in, and then you could always just lose a game and then go to the 8 seed. So the Clippers, Minnesota, Dallas, Sacramento, Golden State, Phoenix, San Antonio. Even though the Portland Trailblazers made a little bit of a push here before the All-Star break, but they're not going to get in clearly. I'm going to say that the team that you don't want to see in the 8th seed is Golden State, because you've seen them rise so well in the playoffs with Jimmy Butler as a player. He's risen so well in the playoffs that if you have Jimmy Butler in his playoff state, you know what Steph Curry's capable of in the playoffs. Then you just need an outlier series from somebody. And outlier series are something that Thunder fans are very familiar with. Yeah. And so if you got that outlier series from somebody, they could really push you. And then Dallas, if they were the 8th seed, clearly that would be difficult. But we've already talked about their injury concerns, and not just their injury concerns, but how their personnel has changed to the point where we think the Thunder would be able to match up well against the Mavericks. Yeah. So I would say of the 8 seeds who are a threat, it'd be Warriors, Dallas, Minnesota, Clippers, Sacramento. I'm not afraid of Sacramento at all. So I would say I think Sacramento's probably going to drop out of the play-in, and then you'd add in the Suns. I don't think that the Spurs are a threat. I think it'd be fun. It'd be really fun to see Chet Wemby round 1. They're not a threat at all. So I would say Kings are the least threatening, Spurs second least threatening, Suns third least threatening, Minnesota, Clipper, in Minnesota and Clippers, Clippers, and then Minnesota, and then you'd get Golden State and Dallas, and those are the teams that you really want to avoid. And then I have no concerns about the Thunder beating the Rockets in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And then we went through Lakers, Denver, Memphis.
What would be interesting, and maybe a scenario you would not want to unfold. I think Dallas is an obvious one if they're healthy, but like assuming they're not, having to go through Jimmy and Steph round 1, followed by Luka and LeBron round 2. And I think the Thunder would clear both. Like I do. I don't think that would be a concern. But those are the kind of guys in the playoffs that you're like, what if something happens? Like that would be a comfortable but interesting first couple of rounds, especially if you follow that up by the Joker and the Denver Nuggets. Like that's an interesting path, man.
So let me know what you think of this. I think you have to very carefully craft this expectation level for the Thunder because it's just their second playoff series, playoff run. I think that with the Thunder, it'd be a disappointment to not go to the finals, but not a disaster. Like, yes, this team should win the West. I mean, we're having to really scrap and claw for more than just Denver to be competition on paper for this Thunder team. So if they lose to anybody but Denver, it's a disappointment. And then even Denver, we're saying that they're better than. So it would be disappointing flat out for the Thunder not to be playing in June in the NBA Finals. But it's not a disaster because it's their second ever playoffs and because we're going to get to in the next segment what the questions are for this Thunder team, which if they're not answered properly, would unravel this team. All of those questions for me anyway can easily be addressed in the offseason, especially as Brooklyn doesn't move Cam Johnson at the deadline, so he's still out there. There's still things out there to go help this team. So while it's a disappointment, it's not some just utter disaster that people will paint it as, which we can already see coming with the First Take segment today.
Yeah, and I think that the great point you just made. Disappointment, absolutely. I think that would be the word to use. Failure is a word that I think will be used improperly. I think if you lose in the Western Conference Finals, it's a disappointment. It's not a failure. Like I think if you've covered this team or followed this team over the last 5 years, this is like the way they're building it is a 10+ year runway. This is year 2. So good perspective, Rylan.
Now, coming up, what are some questions we still have about this Thunder team as they gear up for the post-All-Star break push and, of course, the postseason? But first, I want to say right now, but our good friends over at OpenPhone. If you're running a small business, that means you wear a lot of hats. Or perhaps you're like Nick Crain, who has 6 jobs all to himself. Your personal phone becomes your business phone. And before you know it, you're juggling customer calls by day and night. Your team is growing. You're getting calls and fielding questions from your team. And you still have your personal life all on your personal number. That's where OpenPhone comes in. It's the #1 business phone system designed to help you keep your work and personal life separate. For just $15 a month, the cost of a few coffees, you get complete transparency and visibility into everything happening with your business phone number. OpenPhone works through an app on your phone or computer and integrates with tools like HubSpot and hundreds of others. It uses AI-powered call transcripts and summaries, so you have a rundown of your calls and action items the second you hang up. And if you miss a call, no problem. Automated messages are sent directly to your customers, ensuring you never miss an opportunity to engage. And of course, they can leave you a note as well. Right now, OpenPhone is offering 20% off your first 6 months when you go to openphone.com/lockedonnba. That's openphone.com/lockedonnba for $20 off, for 20% off your first 6 months. Openphone.com/lockedonnba. If you have an existing number with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no additional charge. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Here with Nick Crain at Crain NBA Media Luminary, Uncontested Podcast as well. Nick Crain, what are some questions you still have for this Thunder team as we head into the last 30-something games in the postseason?
Let's just get this one out of the way. Health, like that's a freebie given, obviously. A I've got two top of mind. I'll give you one. I'll let you comment on it, and maybe you give one, and then I'll give my second. But the 3-point shooting, I think, is just the roller coaster of this team. When they're hitting 3-point shots, you saw it last night in that game where guys like Alex Caruso are hitting, guys like Aaron Wiggins are hitting. When the Thunder is making threes, I just don't know how you beat them. But there's been a lot of games this season, a large sample set, especially early when they were not. I think we saw it in the playoffs last year. They struggled to make threes, and a lot of them were like, Josh Giddey aside, threes that were like good looks, and teams were saying, beat us, like make threes, and they couldn't. Despite being the number one team in the league last year in 3-point efficiency on lower volume. That's still the big question to me. Like, you can rely on the defense. They've had key players out all season long, and the defense has always been phenomenal. To me, it's the offense that's the bigger question, and one of the primary pieces of the offense going well is the 3-point shot.
Yeah, I mean, the 3-point shot is the biggest question. I think that you have now, with the deadline behind us, what the Thunder think, and that's that they're going to gamble on, okay, they failed in their first playoff run. There's no doubt about that. Isaiah Joe, Wiggins, Dort, Kaysen, these guys could not hit the shots that they hit in the regular season come playoff time. They look like a deer in headlights. You can go down all the analogies and expressions you want to use to discuss just how much that they failed at hitting shots in the playoffs. It was their first ever crack at it. And it's like, you can go down the list of superstars who failed in their first ever playoff run, and their second and their third and their fourth and their fifth before they finally broke through. So this team has been so good this year that they deserve a chance to right their wrongs. And when you look at last year's playoff run, for as much as we can harp on the shooting, the Josh Giddey thing was a massive, massive part of why they lost. No backup center was an even bigger part of why they lost in the playoffs and came up short in their first run of a Western Conference Finals. They've addressed those deficiencies tenfold. And now what they're gambling on is, hey, we are doing everything we can on the court right now to make up for that deficiency with what you're seeing them do with Isaiah Joe, of moving him as a movement shooter more, off screens, off DHOs, things that you can count on when the drive and kick stuff isn't there, because it's always there in the regular season. Guys are not giving hard contest every single night after the kick out from Shea. And that's how they boosted up their percentages last year. But in the playoffs, when Dallas was playing on a string and they were flying out to Isaiah Joe in the corner and to Kaysen and all those guys in the corner, they didn't know what to do. They just kept passing the ball around, working for a new shot. And by that time, you're late in the shot clock. You end up getting a bad shot because you passed up an okay shot. You've got to be more comfortable taking the okay shots. You got to be more comfortable being put in actions. And we saw Isaiah Joe running floppy action. I was almost levitating on the last home game. You got to be more comfortable doing those things that are repeatable and that you can create yourself, and not just hope that the defense doesn't close out. Because that's kind of what they were banking on last year, was the hope and the prayer that the defenses still wouldn't close out in the playoffs. And they did that a lot better in the postseason off of Shea kickouts. So that, coupled with, okay, now you have Chet, now in the fold again, and you have this laundry list of Joe, Dort, Wallace, Wiggins, Joe, Dort, Wallace, Wiggins, Chet. You have this list of guys who you feel like they can't all be cold every game, right? Like every game they can't all just go ice cold. Somebody each night is going to step up. Somebody each night is going to play capable of hitting a 3-point shot that night and help your offense succeed. Whereas last season, guys were put into a role whenever Josh Giddey was played off the floor that they weren't accustomed to. Like when Josh Giddey got played off the floor and he broke his starting streak, you had never started Isaiah Joe hardly at all last season. You had never given Joe and Kaysen and Wiggins on-ball opportunity or maximized their minutes in the regular season because you're trying to make the Josh Giddey thing work. And so now this season, they've had that whole body of experiences now. It's why this hot streak from Wiggins is more so his preparation, meeting that opportunity. It's not luck. It's not just like a hot streak that's going to subside at some point. He's obviously not going to average 25 points a night, but he's still going to be a good scorer because he's going to get consistent minutes that you could not give him a year ago when you were still trying to make the Josh Giddey thing happen. And so they're just hoping that it's not going to happen again, where these guys aren't going to crash and burn. They aren't going to all forget how to shoot at the exact same time. And the other team is not going to have a massive outlier series, partly aided by the fact that you had no interior defense during segments of games. And during other segments of the games, you had Josh Giddey on the floor, who can't play defense either. So they're just banking on the changes working. And perhaps they don't, right? Like perhaps, and that's my biggest question is, what if these guys aren't ready for the moment? What if these guys aren't able to shoot when it matters and it being your role players? That's going to be a disappointment. That's going to suck. That's going to unravel the season if that's the case. But then you just head to the summer with very tough questions to answer, and you head to the summer needing to do something to ensure that the next time you're in the playoffs, you at least have a guy or two who you know without a shadow of a doubt that you trust. But Caruso in place of Giddey, he's another guy who they trust that between the guys we mentioned from last year, now adding Caruso on top of that, somebody's going to be able to hit threes that night. And maybe they will, maybe they won't, but that's what they're gambling on. And that's how, without making any moves at the deadline, that their actions on the court is trying to lead to playoff success versus just hitting the trade button and getting trade happy and going for a new player that you'd have to integrate in. So I think that the shooting is number one. My number two is Chet Holmgren. I fully believe, let me be clear, I fully believe that Chet will have enough time to work off this rest, and will have enough time to get back to normal, and will have enough time to fully be ingrained and entrenched in this Thunder offense, which, because defensively he's already there. I mean, it's incredible that game number 2 back from a hip fracture, he's playing at an elite defensive level. Offensively, though, he's got to get back to where he was. And the thing is, though, the reason it's still a question, Nick, before that hip fracture, in those 10 games that he played, he looked like a completely different person offensively. He was able to attack you off the catch, take you off the dribble, score at all 3 levels. It was stuff that this Thunder offense needed injected into them in the postseason, because J-Dub did not have a good offensive postseason. And if you'd have gotten the version of Chet that you saw those 10 games before the injury in the playoffs, and you had, again, another bite at the apple of having a different guy go get you a bucket, man, you'd have been way better off as a team in that Dallas series. Can he get back to that in this short time? Maybe he can, maybe he can't. But like, that's a huge question mark to me, is can he be even a semblance of what he was in that stretch where before he got hurt, like there was early MVP talks, there was early All-NBA talks, there was All-Star talks, basically cemented over a 10-game sample size. Like, if he can get back to that, then it adds another piece to this of an already clear-cut Western Conference favorite getting even better.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree with you. I think he will rise to the occasion. I don't expect him to be the guy he was the first 10 games of the playoffs, but if you can get 90% of that, 85% of that, you're going to be in a good place. Only other one I'd mention briefly here is let us not forget, this is Mark Daignault's second playoff appearance.
Yeah.
Obviously a phenomenal coach. He was coach of the year last year. He's completely flipped the franchise. He gets the most out of every single player. But there's an element of playoffs as from a coaching standpoint that until you've done it or seen it or made the tweak or seen the scheme or the situation, there's an experience factor. And I think we always think about like the fact that the players are young and inexperienced in the playoffs. Mark's the same way. And he's got an incredible group around him. He's got, Sam Presti has been in these situations and has advice for him. He's got incredible mentors. Like, there's no doubt he has the right people around him to be successful. But at the end of the day, when you're walking up the sideline, making the calls, doing the things, there's an element of inexperience that comes with him too. And so I don't know if I consider that like a concern or a question, but it's something to consider as we go throughout this upcoming playoff run.
Yeah, I mean, it is a question. How does he look different as a coach in his second go at this? I just think it's the secret about this business, Nick, as you know, you're going to be right way more often if you just lean negative. Like, look at Tatum and Brown. Like, it looks foolish to question if that can work after they won the title last year. Yet, for 5 years, we were doing it because for 5 years they never won. And so I'm just here to tell you, Thunder fans, everybody is going to pick against the Thunder in all of this. They're all going to lean on last year. They're all going to lean on not being able to hit a big shot whenever it matters. And they're going to do that until the Thunder win. Whether they win this year or they win next year or they win 5 years from now, they're going to keep coming back to last postseason until you change what happened last playoffs. And it's unfair because they can't do anything about this until April. That'll be the next chance to change that narrative. But it's just the reality that we live in, because only one team can win a title every single year. And so how many times did you watch what now we view as a Celtics dynasty, what now we view as the one of the best, if not the best future in the NBA, with Tatum and Brown locked up in Boston, as a team that is infallible for the next few seasons? We were 6 months removed from saying it would never work, and you got to break up the Jays. People in Boston, people nationally, all saying that, because they were right for 5 years, in the sense of, after that immediate season, they could just lean on C. They didn't win it. C, Miami upset them. So things are going to happen in the sense of being on the wrong side of the scoreboard, and people are going to react to it that way. And more often than not, if you just pick a team to lose, you're going to be right, because only one team can hoist the Larry O'Brien trophy at the end of it all. I don't know if this is the Thunder's title season. They're leaning fully on a about face from their role players, and they're either going to get it or they're not. And there's no reason to really overanalyze it past that, because what you saw last postseason was Shea is a bona fide number one who can lead a franchise, who can be the number one option on a title winning team. J-Dub is an elite defender, and Chet Holmgren is a playoff riser. Even as he played all 82 games last year, he still had enough left in the tank that you think the Thunder got beat last year by the Mavericks. Look at his on-off in that series. Without Chet, they would have been annihilated. They would have been swept by Dallas without Chet. And now you have at least competent backup center play. With no offense meant to J-Will, but you can now cover a game in 48 minutes of rim protection, which you couldn't do last year. You can now blanket a game in elite defense for 48 minutes, which you could not do last year. And you now don't have a Josh Giddey-sized hole in your offense or defense, which you did have last year. So I just think that there's so much change that last year is almost irrelevant to all of this. But yet, it's still going to be in the back of everybody's minds as we get closer and closer and closer to the playoffs. And so I just think that you can't – you can't freak out every time that Shannon Sharp or somebody else leans negative on the Thunder, because it's the easy money.
Great example to pile onto what you're saying about the Celtics. We just talked on this podcast about Nikola Jokic being good enough to take his team to the finals. If he hadn't won that one championship, the way we're talking about the Nuggets and Jokic is very different.
And it was different whenever he lost in the first round.
Yeah.
Before he won the championship.
It takes one run to change everything, and every year is very different.
Yeah, and that's another example, though, too, of it's never as good as it seems. It's never as bad as it seems. Of when Denver won the title, not last year, but the year before that, they were called the dynasty in the making. Then they go and lose in the second round, and now people are questioning them, and now Boston's the dynasty. If the Thunder win this year, it'll be the third straight year that we crown somebody a dynasty in June before the next season, and after they've won only once. And so it's just all going to be cyclical, and it's all going to be a process that you don't really have any control over in the sense of being a tastemaker in all of this. Like Dirk, you would not believe what they said about Dirk his whole career until he had the best finals run of all time in 2011, where he was knocking off giant after giant after giant and beat the Heatles. But you should have been there in 06. You should have been there in 07 whenever he got bounced in the first round as the MVP of this league. And you should have been there for all the years in between 11 and 07, where he was just called a soft European white guy that can't win. Like, that's just what you do, because as long as you go negative, again, you're right way more than you're wrong, unless you're being negative about those historic Warriors teams, or you're being negative about LeBron, because more often than not, both those teams, and LeBron being a team of himself, went to the finals. So for everyone else, just say they're not going to make it, and you're going to be right, and you can take your victory lap. So the Thunder might not make it. They might not win. There's a good chance, just based upon the odds, that they won't. Would you rather have one opportunity to win your championship bet, or the field of 16? I'd take the field any day, just by the math of it all. But if you only look at this through the prism of this season, and you only use what we know about the 24-25 NBA season, the Thunder are the best team in the NBA. By every statistic, by the eye test, by the standings, they're the best team in the NBA. And guess what's not going to help any of these other teams come April, the Thunder or otherwise? what happened last year? What happened the year after that? Or happened the year after that? All that happens, all that's going to matter in April is what these teams look like in April. And what this team looks like right now is a team that should go in the West. Nick, I think that this was a fun conversation. I think that it is a perfect illustration of, like it or not, the expectations are to go win the Western Conference. And I've been somebody who, like, I do think that is a double-edged sword of it's sort of unfair, frankly, that in your second ever playoff run for Chet and J-Dub, you need to go win the West for anyone to feel like this is anything less than a shortcoming, right? Anything more than a shortcoming. But it's the reality of the situation. Now, I will say, whatever happens, if they do finish short of the finals or the Western Conference Finals, yes, you can be sad or disappointed. There's no need to panic at all. And so that's kind of the area where, as much as you hate this phrase, because I get it, Nick and I and every other person that covers the team have been beating it into your head since 2020. It is a house money year in a way of if they do fall short, it sucks, but they have enough resources to go change that. And if they fall short in the playoffs, Nick, I think that there's going to be a clear-cut reason why. Either injuries, or the role players aren't good enough, or some other thing that we're not even thinking of right now. But it's going to be very evident, just like why they lost to Dallas was very evident. And what happened after they lost to Dallas? Days after they lost to Dallas, Sam Presti started changing things. And so either they're going to win the title, or Sam Presti will once again start changing things and making this team better. And you do that enough, and you stack days, so to say, you stack off seasons to the point where you're good enough to go win a title, just like Boston did. Like, you're chasing the champs, you're chasing Boston, and just look at their basketball reference page of their playoff staircase of where they finished each year leading up to that title. It took many a summer. It took many a retool. It took many a roster change to get to the point of a championship team, to get to a point where we feel like they're going to be in the hunt to win a title for the next 5, 6, 7 years. And that could be the same route for the Thunder. We're just in year 2 of it.
Completely agree.
Nick, they can find you at the Uncontested Podcast. They can also find you at Crain NBA across social media, including on Twitter. And until tomorrow, as we recap this game against the Miami Heat, be good and be good to one another.